Hi everyone, this is John McKeever here from Data Migrators. Today I want to talk to you about datastage as a service and datastage-anywhere. And what I'm going to do is provide you with a practical example of taking an IBM Cloud hosted datastage instance, so that's datastage as a service, but using it with a runtime engine deployed within a Kubernetes cluster on Microsoft Azure. If you don't know what datastage as a service and datastage-anywhere are, those bits of terminology, then I would encourage you to have a look at another video I've done that briefly introduces those topics, linked somewhere on the screen at the moment. If you're still here, then you're interested in connecting datastage as a service to Microsoft Azure. I'm going to get into the configuration and the commands, and we're actually going to make that happen live in front of us. But before I do that, I quickly want to summarize the process that we're going to go through so it's clear what steps I'm taking. So I've got an IBM Cloud environment and I've got an Azure environment. So I'm going to use my laptop to configure a connection between these two environments. Once that's done, my laptop's out of the picture. It's just used as a one-off configuration process. So on IBM Cloud, I have an organization. Within there, I have a datastage service instance. And importantly, your datastage service instance needs to be using a plan which is datastage-anywhere capable. Okay, there are different types of plan you can have. There's a free tier plan, which is great. But if you want to use datastage-anywhere, you need to make sure you've chosen a datastage plan that supports that. And then within there, within my Cloud Pak for Data environment, I'm going to have a project. Also on IBM Cloud is an IBM Cloud container registry, within which there is an image for the parallel runtime container, which is what's going to get deployed into our Azure environment. We're going to use a bunch of commands on my laptop. Three commands I'll need to have installed on my laptop are AZ or Z, that's the Azure command line interface, kubectl, the Kubernetes command line interface, and there's another command called JQ. I'm not going to use that directly, but it will be used by a script that I will be using, and we'll get to that shortly. JQ is just a JSON command line processor. So I'll be using AZ in particular to define a bunch of resources in my Azure environment, a cluster and a node pool. And as I'm going through the command process, I'll be capturing various bits of information from each of my environments, some IDs and some references that I will store in a file called launch.cfg. And that file is important because what I'm then going to do is go to a public GitHub repository provided by IBM. There's the URL on the screen. And I'm going to clone that locally. And within there, I'll find a script called launch.sh. And I will use that script. I'll run it, providing my launch.az config file as a parameter. And what that script will do is create all the remaining resources in my Azure Kubernetes cluster, and will create a reference in my IBM Cloud environment to that cluster. What that will then enable me to do is to run datastage flows, jobs, in my IBM Cloud hosted environment and deploy workloads to the datastage runtime engine running in that cluster. And also, as that runtime engine goes through its evolution, it gets updates and bug fixes and whatnot, we can use our IBM Cloud datastage environment to detect changes in that container and deploy them to the Azure cluster as well. So the bits of information that we need to collect in order to do that are listed here. On the IBM Cloud side of things, I need a Cloud API key that enables me to talk to IBM Cloud. I'll need a container registry API key, which is different. That enables me to talk to the container registry. And within the Cloud Pak environment, I'll need my Cloud Pak project ID and also a name that I'm going to use to refer to my remote runtime. On the Azure side of the equation, I'll need a resource group name in my kind of Azure-wide scope. Then for the Kubernetes service, I'll need to decide on a name for a cluster, a node pool. I'll need to decide on some cluster parameters like the sizing and things like that. And also I'll need to choose a namespace name as well. Also, we're going to use Azure Files as our storage mechanism, and there'll need to be some kind of storage parameters there, again sizing, and also the tier, the type of storage we're going to use. So let's get stuck into it. Okay, so I've got a browser here open on my IBM Cloud environment. Within there I've got my IBM Cloud Pak environment, I've got my Azure environment, and I've got a browser open on the GitHub repository, which I'm going to clone locally shortly. So lots of sources of information, but don't be dismayed, it's pretty easy. So here in my terminal window, I've got my environment. I'm just in a little project directory I've created to do this. So the first thing I want to do is to verify those commands that I know need to be installed on my laptop. So kubectl is one of them, and that is good. I need the AZ command line, which I've got, and I need that JQ. And I forgot to mention what JQ is required for. That launch.sh script requires JQ to be installed. So that's why that needs to be here. I'm using a Mac, and if you are using Mac OS and you use the brew package manager, the homebrew package manager, each of these three commands is available as a homebrew package. So you can just do brew, install, and then the name of the, I'll just search so you can see it in the repository there. There's kubectl JQ. For if you're doing Azure, that's called, the package is called Azure CLI. There you go. So let's have a look at what I need to provide to that launch.sh script. So if I go to the repository here and I look at remote engine and Kubernetes, which is what we're going to be installing it in the README file there are some important pieces of information. Firstly, it's got the prerequisites here. It says you can use OC, but I believe the script just uses kubectl. We've got some sizes. So these are the three sizes that the script supports: small, medium, and large. The IBM Cloud API key. So we've spoken about a Cloud API key. We can get that easily enough. The Cloud Container Registry API key, and this is why I had an asterisk next to it on my slide earlier. Eventually there will be a fairly seamless way to get hold of this. I understand that right now the way you get hold of a container registry API key is to put a call into support. So you can go to IBM Cloud, raise a support ticket, and they will provide you with a Cloud API key. Further down we've got the input file. So this is what I'm calling launch_az.cfg, and this is the config file that provides all the information to the launch script necessary to set up all of our resources, including the remote runtime on our Azure platform. And what I've done is I've taken this config file template and I've created my own, where I've added a few more bits and pieces of kind of references and commentary, particularly commentary around for each of the names and things that you need to choose, what the naming constraints are. Because when I first started doing this, I kept on bumping into various different naming constraints for different areas. So Azure has its own naming constraints, Kubernetes has its own other different naming constraints, and those naming constraints change depending on what resource you're talking about. So I've tried to summarize each of those here as well. This file that you're looking at, the template, along with another file that lists all of the commands that I'm going to type at the command line, I'll make those available to you as a download, and I'll put the links in the description of this video. You can see the things that we need to provide. At the top, I've put 3 values that I'm going to use interactively at the command line, but they're not necessarily required by launch.sh. I've just stuck them here so that I can keep this config file as an after the fact reference of what I created. So I'll just put them at the top here, and launch.sh will, because it doesn't know what these keys mean, it will just ignore these values, but it's a good way of just putting all of my information in one place, I think. From this bit here below, launch.sh script parameters, this is the template that came from the README file we just had a look at. This accept license entry here needs to be set to true, and Interestingly, you also need to accept the license using a command line option when you run launch.sh. I suspect that's potentially a bit of a mistake in the launch script. I've found that you need both entries. By the time you come to do this, your mileage may vary, but that's my experience. Some of the options where I'm happy to accept the default, like the location of the data center, I've just commented out. Here, I've got that API, the entries for the API key that I got from IBM support, and I will put those in off screen because that's my personal API key that was given to me by support. My cloud API key from Cloud Pak, my IBM Cloud API key, my Cloud Pak project key, and then just some things I need to decide on. I don't find this information from anywhere, they're just decisions, like my Azure project namespace name, a datastage remote runtime name. What am I going to, when I'm in datastage on IBM Cloud, what am I going to refer to this runtime that I'm hosting on Azure as? Here I've repeated the information about the sizing, and because I'm just running a kind of POC kind of exercise here, I'm just going to choose small sizing. Storage, this is the gotcha on Azure. If you're wanting to deploy a remote runtime on Microsoft Azure, you need to choose a storage tier that is premium because it needs to support concurrent read-write. Anything less than premium and you'll get all kinds of errors and I won't be able to help you. But so choose an Azure file, CSI premium. Sizing for storage, I've just chosen 20 gigabytes, doesn't matter, it's just a POC. Some other stuff here to do with NFS. On some of the other demos I do, where we connect datastage-anywhere to Google Kubernetes and AWS, we might choose to use NFS for storage there. Here, because I'm using Azure file, these can all be commented out. So this file, I've actually got a version of this where I've made some of those decisions already. So my resource group name, I'm going to call datastage-anywhere RG. My cluster, ds-anywhere AKS. My node pool, ds-anywhere NP. Be careful with the naming scheme here. As I've mentioned, I've put all the naming restrictions as comments. And namespace, what I want to call my remote engine, all decided. But there are some gaps here I need to fill in. So let's start by going to our various services and collecting the information we need. So the first gap I've got here, other than this other than this container registry set of credentials that I'm going to enter off screen, which I'll do later, the first thing I need is an IBM Cloud API key. So that's easy enough to get. I'm going to go to my IBM Cloud environment. I'm going to go to Manage, Access IAM, API keys, and I'm going to create a new API key, and I'm just going to call it datastage Azure uncreatively. I don't need to set any other options. Create. Like a lot of API key environments, I get one shot at copying the key, so I'm going to copy that now and put it straight into my config file. There, that's done. And I don't need to download it because after this exercise I'll destroy it. So I'm actually done with IBM Cloud now. So the next piece of information I need is my datastage project ID from within Cloud Pak. So if I flick on over to my Cloud Pak page, and I can see I've already got a project created called Datastage Azure. I've literally just created this project. I've done nothing with it, and I'll just jump in and it takes me straight to the manage page, and we can see right there I've got the project ID. So I'm going to copy that and add that to my config file. I've already chosen a namespace name, and the next thing I need is, we're good. Okay, I'm obviously still in Google mindset where we needed to provide far more information. So with Azure, it's pretty light on. So that's fine. So what I'm going to do is just take that bit of information off onto another screen and just add in quickly my information from my container registry. Okay, so I now have my updated launch_az config file in my directory, and I've got my commands installed. So now we need to go off and start creating our resources on Azure. So again, all of the commands I'm going to type here will be available in a file that I'll link to this video. I'm going to start by logging into my Azure environment. That will bring up my authentication stuff. I have logged in. Easily done. Select a subscription number. That's my subscription. Okay. The next thing I need to do is to create a resource group for my resources. Okay, I'm going to stick it in East US. And you'll notice that all these names I'm sticking in for the name of the resource group, they're the names that we just saw in the config file that I was just editing. That's done. Now the big one, I'm going to go off and create a cluster. I'm going to create it in the resource group ds_anywhere IG I've just created. I'm going to call it ds_anywhere AKS. I'm going to give it 2 nodes. And this may take just a few minutes or so, and we'll come back when that's complete. Okay, and that's completed. So let's just go and have a look in Azure. So I'm going to go off to my Azure front page, Kubernetes services, and we can see I've got a cluster called ds_anywhere AKS. And if I have a look at node pools, we can see I've got one default node pool called node pool 1. But we're required to have something a little bit more sophisticated than that. So I'm going to run the node pool add command with my parameters that I want. I'm giving this the name ds_anywhere np without the hyphen, because hyphens are not possible in node pool naming. Okay, that's running, and that may take just a minute or so to complete. And I should mention that all of these values that you specify for your cluster and your node pool, they're all in the IBM documentation. The values you may choose and the decisions you need to make and why you would choose certain values over others, they're in the IBM documentation, and also there are some notes in the datastage repository that you just saw me look at earlier on. Okay, so completion of that is done. So let's go over here and refresh our view of node pools. And we can see we've now got a ds_anywhere np node pool. And within there, we've got 2 nodes defined. But right now, we don't have any pods in there that will enable us to run datastage jobs. So from here on, we've got our cluster on Azure. We're going to use kubectl to talk to that cluster. So the first thing we need to do is to we'll just have a look at our kubectl config, local config, and it's empty. So I'm going to get the credentials for that cluster. And now if I have a look at my config, we've got all the details necessary to talk to that cluster. The first thing we're going to do, now that we can talk to that cluster with kubectl, is to create a namespace, which is super quick. And now I believe we have everything we require ready to run our launch.sh script, with the one problem that we don't actually have the launch.sh script locally. So I'm going to go to the root of our IBM DataStage repository, and I'm going to copy the SSH clone string. And I'm going to clone that repository down onto my local machine. And now if I have a look in the datastage remote engine Kubernetes directory, we can see that launch.sh script, and we're going to launch that using our launch.az config. So I'll just copy that string. And you'll notice, as I mentioned earlier, we've got the license accept entry in the config file. My experience is you also need it at the prompt here at the command line as well. So let's see how we go here. And my recommendation is to use the right name for your config file. Okay, so now you can see it's using kubectl, it's using that JQ command, and this script itself won't take too long to run. One thing, of course, this script will do is to connect to our IBM container repository running on IBM Cloud and pull the image for the PX runtime engine and deploy it into the nodes of that Kubernetes cluster we created. So you'll start to see some messages about pulling images shortly. You'll also see a couple of error messages saying that resources like PX runtime are not available, and that's natural because of course they're not yet available. Some of the resources in the script do report error messages, some don't, and I'm sure that script is undergoing evolution over time as well. So again, by the time you come to run this, your experience might be slightly different. So we'll just sit tight for a minute while this script takes a few seconds to do its thing. Okay, so that script has completed. As I mentioned, we've got a couple of errors about PX runtime not there, but that's expected. And it's given us a command at the end to track progress. So I'm going to run that. And we can see that the creation of Azure Small, which is our remote runtime environment, is in progress. Let's just jump to Azure and see what we can see here. So let's just go back to the node pool. So if I have a look at the node pool and the nodes, and if I have a look at the pods, we can see I have two pods here, a IBM CPD datastage remote operator and a container in the process of being created, a PX compute pod, and there's also one in the other node as well. So we can keep on running this command to track progress of the creation of those pods, and we'll come back when that's complete. Okay, so it looks to me like the creation of our remote runtime on Azure has completed. So let's just jump over here and have a look in our cluster, and let's have a look at our node pools, nodes, and within our AKS node, let's say node 0, we can see that we've got PX compute pods, remote operators, all created. So the real way to test that we've got success is to jump over to our Cloud Pak environment, and on the manage page for my project again, if we go down to environments, we can see under templates that there's a new template available called Azure Small with all of the properties that we defined. And most importantly, if we go to the properties of our DataStage project, you'll see it's currently defined as an IBM Cloud project, which means it runs wholly on IBM's software as a service platform. But what I can do is I can immutably turn this project into a remote project. And when I select remote, I can see that the runtime environments available to me are just this one, Azure Small. And I can hit save. I can confirm that this is a one-time action and that once my project becomes a remote project, I'll never be able to take it back. Because once you define that you want to use your own runtime, more options will become available to you, like you'll be able to run arbitrary code in before and after job routines and things like that that you can't do on an IBM only environment. So I'm going to confirm that. And that is an IBM DataStage software as a service anywhere capable project. Okay, so I've created a little CSV file here, and I've gone away and loaded it into Azure blob storage. I've then gone to Cloud Pak and defined a connection to that blob storage, and I've used that connection in a super simple datastage job. And so we're just going to run that and have a look at a job running, built on IBM Cloud and managed on IBM Cloud, but running using a runtime engine on Microsoft Azure. So let's just bring up the logs. And we can see that we've got data flowing out of the blob connection. We've got those rows being peeked into the log. If I just go back to Azure, we can see that there's some workload on our DS-anywhere Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. If you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below, and look out on our channel for more videos about DataStage as a service and DataStage Anywhere. Thanks for your time. See you in the next video.